Good morning, everyone, and happy Valentine's Day. Welcome to today's PolicyMap webinar for California State Library. My name is Klein, and I'll be your trainer for today, and I'll also be available for questions throughout the session. Everybody will be muted. However, if you do have any questions, and I always encourage that, you can simply just type those into the control panel of GoToWebinar, and it'll show up on just my screen. And if it's a question for everyone, I'll be sure to answer it. But if it's a more specific question, I can always follow up with you after the session. And I'm going to do my very best to answer as many questions as I can. But there are a lot of you in this session, so if I miss your question or don't have time to get to it, don't worry, because I will get back to you in an email. So just in case some of you were not able to join the first webinar that we had back in January, I just want to make sure that you are aware that California State Library now has their very own PolicyMap Enterprise license, which means that all California Public Library employees can access the tool from this site here. And the URL is calibrarydata.policymap.com. If you don't already have an account, you can just click on the link here that will take you to this form. It's really short, so once you fill it out and click submit, that will be sent to one of the site administrators, and they'll go ahead and set you up with access. So during that first session, we focused on how to better understand the community living within your library district by generating things like reports and by customizing data layers on the map. In today's session, we're going to take that a step further, and we're going to use some spatial analytics to identify areas where certain interventions can make a big impact on the lives of children and families. I'll also go over how to download critical health data that's specific to the branches within your library district. I think that getting your hands on that data is going to allow you to tailor your services and make a greater impact on the well-being of families across California. I know that recently there's been sort of a shift in the role of libraries from information centers to community resource centers. So my hope is that all of you can use PolicyMap to help make that shift a little bit easier. All right, so I'm going to log into the tool here. And I'm going to zoom into a library district, and we'll do Fresno. So the first thing I want to highlight is that all of you should have access to the social determinants of health collection, which can be found under this curated collections tab at the top right. And most of the data sets that I'm going to highlight today are going to be found in this menu here. All the data that's in this collection can be found in these other tabs here, but this collection just conveniently organizes the SDOH data in just one place. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of some of the data that's in this collection. At the top, you have SDOH by determinant. And when we were putting together this menu last year, it was a little bit tricky because there are really so many different non-medical factors that can potentially impact someone's health. So we settled on these determinants that you see here. And starting at the top, we have life expectancy and mortality. So we can look at the average number of years a person who is born in a particular census tract is expected to live. Under health and healthcare landscapes, you can look at specific chronic conditions such as diabetes and depression. risk factors such as alcohol and opioid use, and access to healthcare. So obviously, if someone does not have easy access to healthcare, that is going to have a major impact on their well-being. Moving down to infrastructure and built environment, we can look at computer and internet access. And this is increasingly recognized as sort of a super determinant of health. I think because access to so much information and services is only available online, computer and internet access plays a really big role in the health outcomes, and it influences SDOH such as education, employment, and healthcare access. I know that today there's still a really big digital divide where certain rural areas and segregated urban areas don't have good internet access. So that's why the role of libraries to provide those people with internet access is really important. Under community and social context, we have a lot of different data sets in here. And you can view data on specific populations, such as people with disabilities. And this is actually broken out by different disability types. Probably one of the more unique data sets we have in here is the Area Deprivation Index. And this is an index that was created by the University of Wisconsin that ranks neighborhoods on the basis of socioeconomic disadvantage in areas like income, education, employment, and housing quality. So a higher index score, and that's these reddish colors here, usually correlates with worse health outcomes in things like life expectancy. Under food and nutrition, we have a lot of data sets related to food access. So this can kind of help you to see where food deserts are located within your library district. Under education, you can look at things like educational attainment, which is broken out by different levels here, graduation rates, and even school locations. Healthy assets, that's where you're going to find your library locations. We have a ton of different financial stability data sets in here. And then finally, we have environmental hazards. Below that, at the bottom of the menu, we also have SDOH by race and ethnicity. So if you're just trying to look at SDOH data for a specific race, this is a really great way to quickly access all that data. And then finally, at the very bottom, you have SDOH by age. So I hope that kind of gives you an idea of some of the data that's within the SDOH tab. Now, because libraries are free, they're accessible to everyone and are key points of community engagement. They are really the perfect partner for public health and education programs. And a really easy way to identify these partners is to simply add some of our point data sets to the map. So first, I'm going to start off by adding our library locations to the map, so we can see where those are located within our library district. And I accidentally added nonprofit locations. So let me add libraries instead. And when we think about certain populations that are important to serve, obviously children are a big one. So if we go back into the SDOH tab, we can add something like Head Start centers to the map. And in order to reach the children that are most at risk, libraries can think about working with some of these Head Start centers to provide material resources and promote literacy at home. And you can actually click onto any of these points, and it's going to give you information like the address for the Head Start Center, the phone number, and even more. People in poverty and those without access to healthy food is another population that I think desperately needs more resources. So we can go back in here and we can add something like farmers markets to the map. And I know that within my own home city of Philadelphia, some libraries partner with farmers markets to host weekly free produce markets with donated food. And if we actually overlay a layer on the map along with these points, so I'm gonna add, let's do the estimated percent of adults reporting to eat less than one serving of fruit or vegetables. So you'll see that in a lot of these areas, there's a really high percentage of people that don't have enough fruits or vegetables in their diet. And a big reason for that could be because they don't have access to it. So I think some of these communities would really benefit from having access to healthier foods at their library through some sort of a partnership. And the last example I have, I'm just going to add community health centers. And we can overlay this with something like obesity rates. And I'm just going to change these points a little bit so you can visualize it a little bit better. So I think libraries can think about hosting something like health screenings or informational sessions through partnerships with some of these community health centers. So hopefully that gives you an idea of how you can use PolicyMap to identify potential partnerships to help support the needs of community members. Now, some of you might be thinking, it's great that I can visualize this data on the map, but it would also be helpful to be able to pull the data from the tool for further analysis. And the great thing about PolicyMap is that it's super easy to do that within the tool. Probably the easiest way to download data would be to open up the sidebar, and you can do that by clicking onto your library district boundary. That's gonna make this menu appear at the top here. And once you click on the download icon, that's gonna open up what we call the sidebar on the right side of the screen. And what's really cool about the sidebar is it's directly tied to the map. So any data that you put onto the map is what you'll be able to download. And there are really 3 different types of downloads that you can do in PolicyMap. The first type is a point download. So because we have our library locations on the map here, you'll see that in the sidebar, it's giving us the option to download that data. So what this will give us is a list of every single library location within the Fresno County Public Library District. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. I pre-downloaded these files beforehand, but there are actually two different delivery methods here. So you can either have the file emailed to you, or if you select download via browser, that's going to make it appear at the top right here once it's ready. So here is our file. So you can see we have some of the basic info for each library branch. But if we scroll over to the right, it also includes all the data that's associated with each point. So things like weekly hours for the library, annual weeks open, and much more. The second type of download is what we call a layer download. And I'm just going to add a layer to the map here. And we'll do households without internet access. So once I add that layer to the map, now if we look over in the sidebar, we have the option to download just the layer data, as well as points with layer data. And I think this in particular is going to be a really powerful feature for all of you, because this is what's going to allow you to download really important SDOH related data for each of your libraries. Another thing I should mention about this sidebar is that it's directly tied to the legends here. So what that means is that if I change things like the year in the legend, the variable, so if I switch this from the percentage of households to the number of households, now if we look back in the sidebar, it's going to show number of households. And even the shaded by down at the bottom, if we were to change that in the legend, that's also going to affect the download. So the layer download, what that's going to give us is a list of every single, in this case, zip code that sits within our library district, and the estimated percent of households with no broadband internet for each of those zip codes. And here is what that file looks like. So in columns D and E, you have the zip code for each of those geographies. And then over in column F, you have the percent of households with no broadband internet in each of those zip codes. And then the last type of download I'm going to show you is this points with layer download. And what's really unique about this type of download is that it basically combines both of these data sets together and creates almost an entirely new one. So what we're looking at here is everything from column J over to the right is going to be our point data. So all the data for our library locations. And then to the left of that, we have the layer data. So it's telling us the zip code that each of those locations sits in. And then in column F, you have the percent of households with no internet access in each of those zip codes. And what we can do is then filter this column. So if you click on the filter feature in Excel, we can actually sort this from smallest to, or largest to smallest. And that allows us to really quickly identify these 3 zip codes where there's a much higher percentage of households with no broadband internet. So maybe the branches that sit within these zip codes need to focus on providing even more resources, such as adding more computers for their community. So as you can see, downloading data in PolicyMap is really straightforward. Another sort of a shortcut for that would be to use this table feature that you see at the top of the sidebar. And what this is going to do is it's going to list all the geographies that sit within our boundary. So the Fresno County Library District. And I can actually sort these by the value here. And now we can identify these 2 zip codes at the top that have a very high percentage of households with no internet. The reason that these 2 did not appear in our file is because they don't have any library branches that are located within them. All right, I'm just going to take a pause there to see if there are any questions I can answer. Awesome. So the last thing I'm going to cover in this session is how to use spatial analytics and overlay multiple layers on the map to identify at-risk populations that are in need of more resources. So the default view of PolicyMap is this single layer view. And you can see that over in the top right. And with the single layer view, what you have are different colors that represent different ranges and different levels of concentration on the map. So if I add a really simple demographic layer to the map, and I'll do people under 18. Again, if you look in the legend, you'll see that we have these different colors that represent these different ranges. But let's say we wanted to see how something like age intersects with maybe educational attainment. If I were to go in here and add an educational attainment data set to the map, you'll see that it just switches those data sets out, and we can't see how those 2 things intersect. And that's really where this multi-layer feature comes into play. So I'm going to switch over to that. And really the first thing you're going to notice once I do that is that everything is just one color now. And the reason for that is because if you look over in the legend, you'll see that the range is going from 0%, which is the minimum, all the way up to 100%, which is the maximum. So in other words, it's currently capturing all the data for this data set. And it's really your job to use this legend to identify the criteria that you want to see on the map. So let's say we just want to see zip codes where at least 10% of the population or greater have less than a 9th grade education. I can just switch this left number here to 10. Then you'll see that the map reshades and we're only left with the zip codes in purple, where 10% or more of the population has less than a 9th grade education. And the really great thing about the multi-layer feature is that you can continue this process with up to 5 different layers. So now I can go in here and add people under 18. One thing to always pay attention to when you're using the multi-layer feature is, if you can, make sure that these shaded bys are the same. So once that second layer is added, the map still looks the same as it did before, because again, it's capturing all the data for this newly added data set, but we're still being confined within the at least 10% of population with less than a 9th grade education. But I can go in here and say, we just want to see zip codes that have 25% of the population or greater who are under 18. And then once I make that adjustment, again, the map reshades, and now we're only left with the zip codes in purple that meet both of our criteria. And you can actually click onto the map to see why a certain geography is meeting the criteria or why it's not. So this particular zip code here, you can see that it meets both of our criteria. So that's why it's shaded in purple. But if we click around to some of these other zip codes, like this one, we can see that it meets the criteria for population under 18. However, because it does not meet the criteria for the percentage of population with less than a 9th grade education, that's why it's not shaded in. And I'm just going to take this one step further and add a third data set. And we'll do people under 18 in poverty. And for this one, let's try at least 50%. So you'll see that now I think we're only left with, looks like 3 zip codes. And now I'm gonna just add library branches back to the map so we can see which libraries sit within these particular zip codes. So some of the branches that sit within these areas might need to think about ways to better support the youth that live in these areas and provide them with resources to be successful academically. And then one last feature with the multi-layer maps that I want to show you is that at the top of the legend here, you're going to see that we have 2 different functions to choose from. So the AND function, which is what we're currently using, is showing the intersection of data. So in other words, the geographies that meet all of our criteria. We can also switch over to this OR function, which is going to show us the overlapping of data. And what this gives us is kind of a crazy looking map at first, but it's also really interesting to look at because yes, we can still identify areas that meet all 3 of our criteria, like this zip code. But now we can also see areas that meet maybe 2 of our criteria, like this one of our criteria, or even none. So the OR function is also really powerful, and it just sort of allows you to better understand some of the surrounding areas. All right, well, those are, I think, all the features that I was hoping to cover in today's session. So let me know if there are any final questions that I can answer. One last thing I do want to point out is our support page, which you can find at the top right here. This is really a great resource because it has tutorials on all the features. So multi-layer maps and how to download data. But if you have any questions as you start to use the tool more, just feel free to reach out to me directly. And then one last thing I want to mention is we're going to be sending out a follow-up email, and that should include a link to a survey where you can provide feedback and suggestions for topics for future webinars. So we would really appreciate it if you could take the time to fill that out for us. All right, thank you guys for joining. I really appreciate it, and I hope you have a great rest of your Valentine's Day. Thank you.